Gilgamesh, subtitled The Recovering the Masterpiece of Babylonian Literature, because that's what it is. But first of all, we do have to ask ourselves the question, what is Gilgamesh?
They called it the recovery of a masterpiece, the rebirth of a story buried for 6,000 years beneath the ruins of forgotten empires, the Epic of Gilgamesh. But what was it, truly? A poem? A warning? Or something older than either? A message written for a world that no longer remembers how to read it?
Astronomical references, a moon, a star, various symbols, which even could be symbolized as a wristwatch. Technology being used 6,000 years ago.
When fragments of the epic were first translated, scholars hailed it as the beginning of human storytelling, the first great myth ever carved into clay. But one man, Assyriologist Andrew George, saw something far more dangerous. He believed the tablets did not merely tell a story. They opened a door ancient. Civilizations had sealed for a reason. He called it too specific to be myth. Within those wedge-shaped marks were not vague legends, but records, detailed accounts of creation, destruction, and the limits placed upon human life. Astronomical maps, symbols of the moon and stars, references to devices no one should have known existed 6,000 years ago. To Andrew George, the Epic of Gilgamesh was not the first story humanity told. It was the first warning, the unearthing of something that was never meant to be found. Recovering the masterpiece of Babylonian. Beneath the burning sands of modern-day Iraq, British explorer Austen Henry Layard unearthed something extraordinary. He had been searching the ruins of Nineveh, the capital of ancient Assyria, when his team struck a chamber buried beneath layers of ash and dust. Inside, tens of thousands of clay tablets, stacked in the darkness like fossilized thoughts. It became known as the Library of Ashurbanipal, named after the last great Assyrian king, who ruled between 668 and 627 BCE. Many tablets were broken, others blackened by fire, but the words carved into them survived. Among them was a fragment that would rewrite history. For years, the tablets sat untouched in the British Museum. Scholars dusted them, catalogued them, then forgot them, until 1872, when a quiet, self-taught museum assistant named George Smith began to read. Smith could decipher cuneiform, the wedge-shaped script of Mesopotamia. One afternoon, as he translated a damaged tablet, he froze. The words described a flood so vast it drowned the world. Only one man survived, sailing in a great boat filled with animals. His name was Utnapishtim. Smith's heart pounded. He realized what he was reading, the story of Noah's Ark, but older, thousands of years older. The discovery shook Victorian England. For generations, people believed the book of Genesis was the oldest story of creation and flood. But the tablets proved otherwise. They were written in Akkadian. During the reign of Ashurbanipal in the 7th century BCE, themselves copies of even older Sumerian and Babylonian tales dating back another 1,000 years. The flood story existed long before the Hebrew Bible, which meant that the biblical version was not the original revelation. It was an echo. The Epic of Gilgamesh had spoken of the flood long before Noah, long before Moses, long before the first word of Genesis was ever inked. It was the story of a mighty king, Gilgamesh of Uruk, who, after the death of his friend Enkidu, wandered the world in search of immortality. The tale was first sung by Sumerian poets around 2100 BCE. Centuries later, a Babylonian scribe named Sin-Leqi-Uninni gathered the fragments, the chants, the dreams, and the laments, shaping them into the version we know today. In its 11th tablet, Utnapishtim tells Gilgamesh how the gods, disgusted by human noise and defiance, chose to destroy mankind. But one god, Ea, whispered a secret: build a great boat. Fill it with the seed of all living things. The storm raged for 6 days and nights. When it ended, the world was silent. Bodies had turned to clay. Utnapishtim released a dove and a raven. When they did not return, he knew the waters had receded. He built an altar. He burned an offering. And the gods, smelling the sweet smoke, gathered like flies over the sacrifice. It was the world's first apocalypse and its first rebirth. When George Smith realized what he'd found, he reportedly leapt from his chair and ran through the museum, shouting with joy. But his triumph was short-lived. Only a few years later, he died suddenly of disease in the same Mesopotamian sands where the tablets had been buried. Andrew George later said, "He opened a door we were never meant to open, because Smith's discovery did more than resurrect an ancient story. It shattered the illusion that sacred history began with the Bible, forced humanity to face a terrifying thought that our most divine revelations might not be divine at all, but inherited, rewritten, borrowed from those who came before. And if that was true, what else might those forgotten tablets contain? What other truths or warnings had been sealed in the clay of Babylon? The epic that rewrote creation. When scholars first pieced together the opening lines of the Epic of Gilgamesh, Andrew George was among them. He said it felt less like translating and more like awakening something that had been sleeping for thousands of years. But what the ancient words revealed disturbed him. The text did not begin where stories of creation are meant to begin. There is no moment of birth, no divine spark, no hand-shaping clay. Gilgamesh simply is, alive, ruling, partly divine. There is no creation, only continuation, as if the world has existed forever. To Andrew George, this was crucial. The line calling Gilgamesh 2/3 divine and 1/3 human was not poetic flattery, it was theology. It told of a world where humans were not pure creations of a single god, but hybrids made from mixed origins, part mortal, part something else. That belief stood in direct contrast to what later religions would teach, that mankind was the deliberate, perfect creation of one divine will. In Mesopotamia, humanity was not perfect. It was compromised. Gilgamesh ruled the city of Uruk, a walled paradise built by his own hand. He looked out over his kingdom, its gardens, its temples, its towers, and felt nothing. His heart was restless. His people called him cruel. Andrew George once asked his students, "What does it say about us that the first king in human literature had everything except peace? Like Adam in Eden, Gilgamesh lived among abundance, but could not rest. The gods gave him strength, wisdom, even glory, but withheld contentment. And that hunger," George said, "was the first human flaw ever written down." The Babylonian scribe Sin-Leqi-un-Nini, who centuries later gathered the older Sumerian tales, understood this flaw. He reshaped the myths into a single story, one of pride, punishment, and rebellion against the divine order. In his version, the gods are not loving creators, they are jealous overseers, wary of their own creation's growing power. And when Gilgamesh's ambition begins to rival theirs, they send a wild man to humble him, Enkidu. Enkidu is born of clay, untamed, running with animals, drinking from rivers. He is what humanity was before civilization, before temples, before kings. The gods send him not to kill Gilgamesh, but to remind him of what it means to be human. To Andrew George, this was the first record of divine jealousy, a warning written at the dawn of civilization, that every time humanity reaches too high, it must pay the price. Other Mesopotamian myths spoke even darker truths. In the Enuma Elish, mankind is not born from divine love, but from blood. The gods slay one of their own, the rebel Kingu, and mix his blood with clay to form humans. It is not creation, it is enslavement. The gods make humanity to spare themselves from labor, to serve, to build, to worship, to feed the heavens with their sweat. Andrew George saw this as the most haunting message buried in the tablets, that the earliest civilizations believed mankind was born to serve, not to rule. And when he read the oldest lines of the text, he noticed something that others had missed: a plural word used for creators. The same plural later echoed in the book of Genesis: Elohim, the gods. Perhaps, George wondered, both stories had drawn from the same ancient source, a time when creation was not the work of one being, but of many. If the epic that began in Uruk could rewrite what we thought we knew about our beginnings, then what might still be hidden in the verses that followed? Andrew George would soon find out. But what he uncovered next would shake even him, because the deeper he went into the language of the gods, the more he began to feel that the language was reading him back. The man who tried to translate the gods. For most scholars, translation is an act of understanding. But for George Smith, and later Andrew George, it became something closer to possession. Every man who devoted his life to. The Epic of Gilgamesh seemed to leave part of himself behind in it, as if the story demanded payment for every word it revealed. Smith died at 36, on the same Mesopotamian soil where the tablets had slept for millennia. The cause, officially, was disease, but those who worked beside him whispered that he died too close to the text. Whispering in Akkadian, indistinct, almost melodic. After Smith, other scholars began to report the same strange experiences. They spoke of low voices, whispering in forgotten tongues, as they worked late at night. Dreams that bled into waking, rhythmic sounds, like chanting, repeating in their ears. No one could explain it, but the voices always stopped the moment they left the project. Andrew George, quiet, meticulous, withdrawn, took over the work in silence. He rebuilt the epic from more than 300 broken fragments. For years, he lived like a man in exile. He said the words felt alive. When he read the tablets aloud, sometimes he would stop mid-sentence and stare, as if the symbols had shifted before his eyes. He later confessed, "Sometimes I feel the text translates me." His notes began to change. Instead of Gilgamesh weeps, he wrote, "I weep." Instead of he who saw the deep, he wrote, "I see the deep." Students thought it poetic. Colleagues thought it exhaustion. But George knew something else was happening. The more he spoke the ancient language, the more he felt it speaking through him. In the ancient world, words had power. In Jewish mysticism, they said that mispronouncing the divine name could bring madness or death. Andrew George began to wonder if Akkadian, the language of the tablets, worked the same way. It was not an ordinary tongue. It was the language of priests, sorcerers, and magicians. Every syllable was once used in prayers, curses, and invocations. To translate it aloud was to reenact those same rituals. He started to suspect the epic was written that way on purpose, not just to tell a story, but to perform one, to make something happen when read aloud. Then came the fragment he could never finish. He described it in his notes: a broken tablet whose text circled back on itself, ending exactly where it began. A sentence without end. A trap written in clay. He called it the hidden tablet that shouldn't exist. For centuries, the Epic of Gilgamesh was believed to end with Tablet 12, the strange final chapter where Enkidu, long dead, returns to speak again. A scene that makes no sense. An ending that shouldn't be there. In that tablet, Gilgamesh speaks with his dead friend, asking what life is like in the underworld. But Enkidu's death had already been written. Mourned, sealed. To Andrew George, this was not resurrection. It was intrusion. A voice breaking through from the other side. Tablet 12 was written in a different dialect, in a different hand. It didn't belong. It was an interruption, a message from somewhere else. George believed the scene was not about faith or divine mercy. It was rebellion. Enkidu, friendship so powerful it defied cosmic law. A human voice calling the dead. Back from silence, he said it was the first story, to ask whether love could overcome death. And the answer, whispered in clay, was yes, but at a cost. Then came the rumor of the 13th tablet. In 2021, near the ruins of Nineveh, a team of archaeologists unearthed a small fragment of clay written backwards, each mark reversed, meant to be read only in reflection. No official paper was ever published, but whispers began to spread. They called it the 13th tablet. Photographs circulated privately. George was said to have seen them. He never confirmed it, but a student later recalled his words. If it's real, it doesn't belong to the living. Linguists who studied the images claim to translate a single line. He who reads awakens what sleeps. The reversed writing matched spells used in The Descent of Ishtar, rituals written in mirror form, meant for messages sent to the dead. This tablet didn't continue the story. It commented on it. It warned the reader. George never called it authentic, but he never denied it either. He wrote, "Some texts were not meant to be read. They were meant to be obeyed." To him, Tablet 12 and the rumored Tablet 13 were connected, not by story, but by purpose. Both challenged the line between life and death, one through myth, the other through language itself. If that connection was real, then these were not stories about the afterlife. They were instructions, and the question that haunted George's final notes was simple and terrifying. What happens when the living read what was written for the dead? The Epic of Gilgamesh is often called a story about mortality, but Andrew George saw something far darker. It is not merely the fear of death, it is about feeding it. After Gilgamesh, an Enkidu kill Humbaba, the guardian of the cedar, forest, and later the bull of heaven. The gods gather like flies over the sacrifice. The text presents Enkidu's death as punishment. But George read it differently. He saw a system, a cycle in which divine appetite is nourished by human grief. Death becomes sustenance, sacrifice becomes ritual, and humanity is the offering. This idea was not unique to Mesopotamia. In the Bible, God delights in the aroma of burnt offerings. In Akkadian, the phrase Re Nashi, the scent of mankind, carries the same meaning. The gods, George realized, do not live on air or light. They live on the energy released at the moment life ends. Every death feeds them. Every tear, every lament, every remembered life fuels their existence. Enkidu's death, then, was not punishment alone. It was a gift. His grief, his story, the memory of him all became part of a system older than kingdoms, older than kings, older than clay itself. And the rumored 13th tablet seemed to confirm it. He who reads awakens what sleeps. Every time the epic is spoken, remembered, or read aloud, it calls forth the presence of the dead, and with them, the power of the gods. For George, the conclusion was unsettling. The epic survives because humanity must keep it alive. Forget it, and the cycle starves, remember it. And the gods endure. Immortality, he said, is not a gift. It is the greatest threat to divinity. A world without death would starve them. And yet, humanity cannot stop seeking it. Andrew George saw the pattern return in the modern world. AI, cloning, digital consciousness, the dream of uploading the human mind, all are echoes of the same ancient obsession that drove Gilgamesh across deserts and mountains in search of eternal life. humankind still chases what destroyed its first hero. Soft, reverent pause. In the final tablet, Gilgamesh realizes that the walls he built around Uruk will outlast him. Where scholars saw a message of legacy, George saw a warning. The gods allowed him to build only to test him, to let him believe he had conquered time, so that he would feel the agony of watching it slip away. And the 13th tablet, whispered in fragments, echoed the same lesson. He who builds again what was drowned shall drown again. Every attempt to outlive limits, every effort to conquer death, every civilization that rediscovers Gilgamesh mirrors the same folly. Andrew George believed the epic was not just history, it was a warning. Death gives life meaning. Without it, love, courage, and purpose dissolve. And yet, humanity never listens. We pour ourselves into screens, into data, into machines. We chase youth. We cling to permanence. We try, in subtle and modern ways, to escape the inevitability that killed Gilgamesh. The Epic of Gilgamesh was never only about one man's search for immortality. It is about ours, our ceaseless desire to outlive our limits instead of living fully within them. Every reading, every retelling, every memory of the epic keeps the cycle alive. And as George warned, before I die, please listen. Because the curse of Gilgamesh is timeless. We never learn Otro, the epic endures. It survives in fragments, in whispers, in voices raised centuries apart. It feeds on memory, on grief, on the longing of those who refuse to accept the limits of mortality. Gilgamesh once sought to conquer death. We still do the same. The walls we build, the legacies we leave, the screens we stare into, all attempts to cheat the inevitable. And yet, the story reminds us, there is no victory over time, no escape from the cycles that shape life and death. The Epic of Gilgamesh lives because we cannot stop speaking it. It survives because the gods, the dead and the ancient words demand it, and perhaps, in the whisper of clay and wind, in the echo of those long dead voices, it continues to ask the same question it posed 6,000 years ago. What will we do when the living read what was written for the dead?